The clouds glided across the blue sky that spring morning, creating a play of light and shadow that seemed to dance on the walls of the room where I was getting ready. The white dress, delicately embroidered with small satin flowers, hung from the wardrobe like a promise. My heart was racing, a mix of excitement and anxiety that left my hands trembling as I applied pink lipstick. It was the day of my wedding to Thomas. After 3 years of dating, we were finally taking the next step. I looked at myself in the mirror, adjusting the flower tiara that held back my brown hair. There was something in my eyes, a different sparkle. Was it happiness? Fear? Maybe a bit of both. The door opened slowly and my mother, Kate, appeared reflected in the mirror behind me. She looked elegant in her navy blue dress, but her face carried a seriousness that contrasted with the festive occasion. "Alice, you look beautiful," she said, approaching and adjusting a strand of my hair. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Thank you, Mum," I replied, smiling. "I'm so nervous I can barely breathe." She hesitated, her eyes meeting mine through the reflection. I always thought we had the same eyes, hazel with that look that seemed to read people's souls. But today, hers were loaded with something I couldn't immediately decipher. "Dear, She paused, choosing her words. "Are you sure about this?" I turned to face her directly. "About what exactly, Mum?" "This marriage, Thomas." Her voice was calm, but her hands twisted, betraying her apparent tranquility. "You are still so young. There's so much time ahead." "I'm 26, Mum. I'm not an impulsive teenager." Kate sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. Beside her was the old box where she kept her memories. In it, a photo of her and my father on their wedding day, 28 years ago. A marriage that had ended with shouting, slamming doors, and a painful separation when I was only 12 years old. "Alice," she said softly, "love in the beginning is like fireworks. Bright, exciting. But then, when the lights go out and only smoke remains." "Thomas is not like Dad," I replied firmly, sitting beside her. "You know that." She took my hands and squeezed them tightly with an unexpected urgency. "You have plans, dreams. That master's degree in literature you've always wanted." "I can do this while married too," I argued, feeling a twinge of irritation. "Thomas supports me." "Now he does," she said, and there was a deep sadness in her voice. "But men change when they put a ring on their finger. Your father also said he supported my dreams of opening my own bookstore, until the day he said it was a silly hobby and that I should focus on being a good wife." I felt a lump form in my throat. Stories about my father always affected me, even after so many years. Kate suddenly stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the preparations for the garden ceremony were almost ready. White chairs aligned, the floral arch under the old oak tree, colourful ribbons dancing with the breeze. "Do you know why I chose not to marry again, even after meeting Richard?" she asked, without turning around. Richard had been my mother's partner for 5 years, a kind man who treated her with respect and affection. "Because you were traumatized by marriage," I replied automatically. She turned, a sad smile on her lips. "No, dear. It's because I learned that happiness doesn't come from a piece of paper or a ceremony. It comes from the freedom to be who you are, without having to shape yourself to anyone's expectations." I looked at the clock on the wall. There was 1 hour left until the ceremony. My stomach tightened in a mix of excitement and anxiety. My mother approached again and, in a gesture that caught me by surprise, gripped my arm firmly. "Alice," she said, her voice choked, "you will never be happy if you marry today." Her words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't a mere opinion or advice. It sounded like a prophecy, a painful certainty coming from someone who had already been through this. "Mother, please," I whispered, trying to control the tears that threatened to ruin my makeup. "Not today." She slowly released me, stepping back. I saw in her eyes that she wanted to say more, to convince me, to protect me from what she feared might be a terrible mistake. But I also saw the exact moment when she decided to respect my choice. "I'll be by your side no matter what happens," she said finally, adjusting my veil with gentle hands. "I just want you to be happy, my love. Truly happy." In that moment, with the afternoon sun illuminating the room and the distant sound of guests arriving, I made my decision. I loved Thomas. I believed in our future together. And so, despite my mother's warning echoing in my ears, I walked down the aisle of flowers under her concerned gaze to say yes to the man I had chosen as my life partner. The first months of marriage were like a dream. Thomas and I moved into a small apartment near the city centre, decorated with second-hand furniture and plants, struggling to survive under our inexperienced care. On the walls, photographs of our honeymoon on the beach, genuine smiles and loving gazes. Thomas worked as an engineer in a medium-sized company, while I taught literature at a high school, saving every penny to start my master's degree the following year. Our nights were filled with impromptu dinners, old movies, and late-night conversations about books, dreams, and the future we would build together. My mother's words seemed more and more distant, almost an echo of an irrational fear. Thomas was not like my father. He encouraged me, valued my independence, and celebrated my small victories. When I mentioned applying for the master's program, he was the one who researched the deadlines and helped me organize the necessary documents. Kate visited us occasionally, always bringing small practical gifts, tablecloths, kitchen utensils, books. She would smile at seeing our happiness, but sometimes I caught her watching Thomas with an analytical look, as if she were searching for signs of something only she could recognize. Then, 6 months after the wedding, our little perfect world began to show its first cracks. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday. Thomas picked up the phone and his expression changed immediately. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, he hung up and sat heavily on the couch. "The company is making cuts," he said, his voice strangely distant. I was laid off. I sat beside him, holding his hand. "We will be okay," I assured him. "You are talented. You will find another job quickly." He nodded, but there was a shadow in his eyes that didn't disappear. In the following weeks, Thomas sent out dozens of resumes, attended interviews, received vague promises. Meanwhile, our savings dwindled. The rent, the bills, the everyday expenses, everything suddenly seemed heavier. One night, coming home after a long day at work, I found Thomas sitting in the dark, staring at the computer screen showing yet another job rejection. "Maybe we should postpone your master's enrollment," he suggested when I sat down next to him. "Just until I find a new job." I felt a chill run down my spine. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "You will never be happy if you marry today." Was this what she feared? That I would have to give up my dreams because of marriage? "No," I replied firmly. "We'll find a way. I can take on more teaching hours, maybe do private tutoring." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become frequent since the layoff. "I don't want you to carry all the burden, Alice. It's not fair to you." "That's what a marriage is for," I argued. "We support each other." He smiled sadly. "Like your father supported your mother?" His words hit me like a slap. Thomas knew well the story of my parents, the broken promises, the deferred dreams that never came true. "You are not my father," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. And I don't want to become him." That night, lying in bed while Thomas took a shower, I picked up my phone and stared at my mother's number. Part of me wanted to call, to confess my worries, to ask if this was what she had foreseen. Another part feared that confirming her suspicions would be like admitting defeat. The next day when I got home, I was surprised to find Thomas in the kitchen, preparing my favourite dish. On the table, an envelope. "What is this?" I asked, curious. "Open it," he said, a slight smile on his lips. Inside, I found an acceptance letter for a scholarship program for my master's degree. Thomas had researched, gathered the information, and even filled out part of the documentation. "You deserve to achieve your dreams, Alice," he said, holding my hands. "We'll find a way. Together." At that moment, I felt the tears streaming down my face. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of relief and gratitude. Thomas was not stepping away from my dreams. He was helping me find new ways to achieve them, despite the difficulties. In the following weeks, we both reinvented ourselves. Thomas found a temporary job at an architecture office, not his ideal area, but it allowed us to pay the bills while he continued looking for something better. I got a partial scholarship for my master's degree and organised my class schedule so I could study without giving up income. Our life wasn't perfect. There were nights of worry about bills, moments of frustration when things didn't go as planned, small arguments born out of stress. But there was also a genuine partnership, a commitment to move forward together, supporting each other's dreams. On a Sunday afternoon, while we were organising our small library, the phone rang. It was my mother, inviting us for lunch. The garden of the house where I grew up was exactly as I remembered, the old swing hanging from the oak tree, the carefully tended flower beds, the scent of lavender in the air. Kate greeted us at the door, hugging us warmly. Richard, her boyfriend, was in the kitchen finishing up lunch. While Thomas was helping Richard with the salad, my mother invited me to see something in the office. There she opened a drawer and took out a carved wooden box. "Do you remember this?" she asked. "How could I forget?" It was the little box where she kept her lost possibilities. Newspaper clippings about courses she never took, sketches for the bookstore she never opened, dreams that were postponed until they disappeared. "I threw away all the clippings," she said, opening the empty box. "I realised I was clinging to the past, to choices I can't change." I felt a lump in my throat. "Why?" Kate sat on the edge of the desk, her eyes meeting mine. "Because I realised that I was projecting my fears onto you, Alice. On your wedding day, I wasn't seeing you and Thomas. I was seeing myself and your father." She took my hands, just like she did that day 6 months ago. "You are not me, and Thomas is definitely not your father. What I see when you two are together is not what I had. It's what I wished I had." Silent tears streamed down my face. "When you said I would never be happy, it was my fear talking," she completed. "I was wrong, Alice. So wrong. Happiness doesn't depend on being married or single. It depends on being with someone who respects who you are, who walks beside you, not in front of or behind you." Suddenly, I remembered all the times Thomas showed that respect, when he encouraged me to apply for the master's program even in tough times, when he rearranged his schedule so I could attend a literary workshop, when he celebrated with me every small achievement as if it were his own. "I think it wasn't a warning you gave me that day," I said, wiping away the tears. "It was a lesson I needed to discover for myself." Kate smiled, her eyes shining. "The warnings from those who love us come from the scars they carry, dear. But our choices need to be ours, even if it means risking having our own scars." We returned to the dining room where Thomas and Richard were laughing about some story. Thomas looked up when I entered, and his smile lit up as it always did when he saw me. It was the same look from the day of our wedding, full of admiration and genuine love. During lunch, we talked about the future, my studies, the new job opportunity Thomas was considering, Richard and my mother's plans for a trip next year. It was a simple conversation about ordinary things, but filled with possibilities and hope. Later, while helping my mother with the dishes, she mentioned how Thomas had changed since the wedding. "For the worse?" I asked, in a tense joke. "For the better," she replied sincerely. "He seems more complete, as if marrying you has made him more himself, not less." I thought about that as we drove home that night. The full moon illuminated the road, and Thomas drove in comfortable silence, his hand occasionally finding mine over the seat. The truth I discovered in these 6 months was that marriage, any relationship really, was like a mirror. It didn't create new things in us. It only reflected and amplified what already existed. With my father and mother, the mirror had reflected insecurities, control, and resentment. With Thomas and me, it reflected partnership, respect, and mutual growth. My mother's words on my wedding day were not a curse, but a warning born of her pain. And although there were moments when I almost believed she might be right, I now knew that our story would be different, not because we had guarantees, but because we chose, every day, to build something better together. When we arrived home, Thomas held my hand before we got out of the car. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my thoughtful silence. I smiled, squeezing his hand back. "I'm thinking that my mother was wrong," I replied. "I'm happy I married you." His smile lit up the night, and as we walked together to our little house, I was certain that regardless of any challenges that might come our way, we would continue writing our story with 4 hands, a story different from the one my mother feared, and much more beautiful than either of us could have imagined. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.